I would like to begin by acknowledging with the deepest respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory this university stands, and the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Wasanish peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. I would also like to acknowledge that our lecture this evening is made possible through the generous support of the Orion Fund that is facilitated through the Office of the Dean of Fine Arts. Our guest this evening, Manuel Mathieu, holds an MFA from Goldsmith's College from London. He has exhibited in England, Belgium, China, Canada, the United States, Spain, France, Morocco, and Martinique. His work is part of different collections such as the Musée National des Beaux-Arts de Québec, the Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal, and the Museum of Fine Arts of Montreal. His work has recently been included in The Other Side of Now at the Perez Art Museum Miami. 2020 has been a significant year for him as he presented solo exhibitions at the Museum of Fine Arts of Montreal and the Power Plant in Toronto. He also presented his work in the context of group exhibitions at Musée d'Art Contemporain of Montreal, at the Phi Foundation in Montreal, at the Song Museum in Beijing, and the Kunstmuseum in Stuttgart. Please join me in welcoming Manuel Mathieu.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm going to start by, wishing you guys a good night. I'm happy that you're joining me tonight. So I'm going to get right into it. The conversation I'm going to have with you, can you hear me? Everything? Okay, so the conversation I'm going to have with you today is not really going to be academic focus. It's really going to be about my experience as an artist. I'm going to start talking about my work. I didn't want to do that at first, but I figured it's a good and honest way to connect with you in terms of my journey, in terms of what I understood from what it is to be an artist. So I started with that quote from Luck. And I had a problem. It took me a lot of time to understand what he was talking about, because to start with the idea that art must be something, for me, that was already a problem, but the idea that he's talking about that you must discover and reveal the beauty which prejudice and caricature have overlaid, it triggered a lot of questions for me, like questions like what he's talking about, what beauty he's talking about, what prejudice and caricature, and what kind of caricature and prejudice is talking about, and depending on which center, which perspective. And in that sense, if you had to look at all the notes that I sent you, there's a Usman interview where he's asking, actually, he's saying that Europe is not his center, for example. So I think it's really important to start the base of, when you're looking at art, there's always an important acknowledgement of what perspective that you're putting forward to start the quest of your research or things like that. So to do that, I'm going to put the base of my own centers, all right? And the base of where I'm coming from, how it started for me, and who played an important role in my journey. So and also, just before I get in the meat of it, the reason I decided to actually cut it in half, it's because the first part will be about my work, my research, and the things I've discovered so far that I will share with you. And we will cut it with 10 minutes. You'll be able to ask me questions about those things. And then the last part will be about certain concerns I had about simplicity and ephemerality, and how these things, they operate within my work, and certain artists that I admire, and certain ideas that I have in terms of repetition, in terms of music, in terms of honesty, when it comes to these kind of things. So the second part was about simplicity and ephemerality, and I'll refer more to certain links that I sent you before, the notes, basically. So it all started for me with my mentor. How There you go. It all started for me with my mentor, Mario Benjamin. So I met Mario, I was about 15 years old, and Mario was always, it started my understanding of art with a very particular legacy, because he refuted what it was to make Asian art, you know. His perspective was always like, I'm not an Asian artist, I'm like an international artist. He was talking a lot about universality and things like that. These are things that at first I didn't really understand the weight of it, because where I come from, I mean, as a Black nation, and growing up in a Black nation, this idea of there weren't really a difference between, well, I wasn't exposed to the white gaze, basically. Okay, so I didn't really have to justify myself or to kind of like position myself when it comes to that gaze. So when he introduced me to art and introducing me to catalogs and to artists, and we're talking about artists like Monatum, Boltanski, de Kooning, a lot of Solewit, a lot of artists that was Western artists, basically. So I wasn't introduced to the Haitian legacy of it really early on. So what that did is that while I was in Haiti, I was learning about Christo, and I was learning about Boltanski in a context of Haiti, without necessarily understanding that these artists were white artists or Western artists, you know. So I didn't have this kind of like dichotomy. For me, I was just discovering souls, you know. So that created a very particular context. And what it really did to me at the time is that he introduced me to visual poetry, you know, because I wasn't really kind of encountering any kind of politics around what it was to be an artist at the time. Maybe if I knew, I wouldn't have made the jump of being the artist that I am today. You know, I think it's actually interesting to keep a certain level of naivety when it was important for me to keep that level of naivety to start my journey, basically. And what he did, for example, is introduce me to artists like Drell Peter Whitkin, which is an artist that stayed with me to this day. And that's what I mean by poetry, for example. So this is a picture of a dead head, of somebody's head, and the artist cut the head and just flip it aside, and it's called a kiss, which is le baiser in French. So this is, for example, something that he would introduce me to, and naively, I would understand that this is part of a particular language, and for me, that was the beginning of my introduction to poetry, to a certain point. In that journey of defining what it is to be an artist for me, I encountered a lot of definitions, a lot of intuitive understanding of what it was. And while I was doing my research, because I think it made sense to constantly keep an eye open on different ways of understanding our existence. A friend of mine sent me, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen because I'm gonna get to a friend of mine sent me The Artist Struggle for Integrity, that you probably know about, from James Baldwin. If you don't know about it, I just encourage you to listen to it all. But there's a particular part of it where he talks about the artist. And I think I could try to talk about what it is, but I think it's a good base to start this conversation, because he pinpoints a lot of things. And after that, I'm gonna dive into, sorry, it might work directly, but I think this is a strong, an interesting base to start the conversation. So I'm gonna just put it in. Can you hear it? All right, so I'm gonna put it in. It's 3 minutes. I'm just gonna have 2 clips like that of 3 minutes. So we're not gonna have a lot of talking, but we'll get into the meat of the work right after that. So I'm putting it in.
And only authors have told, since we have heard of man, what it is like for anyone who gets this planet to survive it. What it is like to die, or to have somebody die. What it is like to fear death. What it is like to fear. What it is like to love. What it is like to be glad. Hymns don't do this. Churches really cannot do it. The trouble is that although the artist can do it, the price that he has to pay himself and that you, the audience, must also pay is the willingness to give up everything, to realize that although you spent 27 years acquiring this house, this furniture, this position, although you spent 40 years raising this child, these children, nothing, none of it belongs to you. You can only have it by letting it go. You can only take if you are prepared to give. And giving is not an investment. It is not a day at the bargain counter. It is a total risk of everything, of you, of who you think you are, who you think you'd like to be, where you think you'd like to go. Everything. And this forever. Forever. Now, if I may put it this way, and all my tribe, if I may put it that way, find it's very hard to do. And it's very hard on my mother, and my sisters and my brothers, and all my friends, and it's very hard on me, and I may fail in the next 2 seconds. But then one has got to understand that as I and all my tribe, I mean artists now, that if it is hard for me, if I spend weeks and months avoiding my typewriter, and I do, sharpening pencils, trying to avoid going where I know I've got to go, then one has got to use this to learn humility. After all, there is a kind of saving egotism too, a cruel and dangerous, but also saving egotism about the artist's condition, which is this. I know that if I survive it, when the tears have stopped flowing and the blood is dried, when the storm has settled, I do have a typewriter, which is my torment, but it's also my work. If I can survive it, I can always go back there, and if I've not turned into a total liar, then I can use it and prepare myself in this way for the next inevitable and possibly fatal disaster. But if I find that hard to do, and I
know. So that's, let me just get back to my presentation. Yeah, so the reason I wanted to point you in that direction, it's interesting to see how sharp his understanding of being an artist is. And I wouldn't say it in general, but I think it's something to think about. It's something to bounce on. And I think he managed to kind of point in an interesting direction. So I think it's something that I would encourage you to listen to. So we're gonna get into the work. So what you're seeing right now is a painting of the Autopsy of Kennedy. So this is the presentation. This is a work that I did for the final show I did at Goldsmith's. And what you see in that work is a it's the first attempt in a body of work that I did, where I started talking about components of history. And I started talking about the dictatorship that took place in Haiti. And the way that it got to me is I had an accident. I had certain scars, but in my brain that I couldn't see, and I understood that the land that we're actually living on carry also invisible scars that we cannot see. And um, and how do you kind of transcribe these scars, you know? And I'm talking about it from a very abstract point of view, but um, that perspective really helped me dig into my own history and my own legacy to understand what it is that is important to me and how can I bring it to life. So the reason I painted Kennedy was the relationship that Kennedy had with Duvalier, which is the Duvalier is it's a 30 years dictatorship that took place in Haiti. You have the father and the son. And I made a interesting correlations between, right up. There you go. So that's the reference to the autopsy of Kennedy. And that's the painting. And what I did is that I put the painting, the presentation was called One Future. So I put the painting next to this painting here, which is a painting of the execution of Jacques-Stéphane Alexis, who was a Haitian writer at the time. So he was executed by the regime. He actually disappeared. We don't know exactly what happened to him, but I imagine the execution. So the idea of putting these two together is to kind of show an horizontal perspective of life in front of human barbarity. So the idea was, in death, these two people that might be important for different reasons, in front of human barbarity, they're actually the same. So the idea was to kind of create a democratic perspective on these barbarity. So that's how I started a kind of journey on that period of history. And in that same perspective of working on Jacques-Stéphane Alexis, that period really made me understand how, when you look at history, of it actually how history, from many parts of history, everything is connected, because the dictatorship that took place of Haiti is actually collateral damage of capitalism, or the rise of capitalism. It's actually, there was a lot of dictatorship that took place in a lot of places in the South at the time. And for example, Jacques-Stéphane Alexis and a lot of people were killed in Haiti. The reason why Duvalier got the power is because it was to prevent communism coming into the island because of our proximity with Cuba. So the American government actually gave him full power, and that's how it turned into a dictatorship. And that what happened in several countries in the South America, more precisely. And I put that picture, and I did a painting actually in relation to that meaning, because Jacques-Stéphane Alexis on the right actually met Mao. So the fear that Duvalier had was actually real in that sense, because he was openly a communist in that sense. So what I did is that I was interested in these kind of things, and it was the beginning of a way of thinking or putting ideas together. And I did a painting, which is a combination of, like, if you can you see my mouse? Okay, so this was like, in my head, I was like, okay, what is happening? What is happening in that meeting right here? And it's a question. It's like there's no answer to that question. And I usually start working when it becomes impossible for me to find answers. That's actually the ground where I start building on. You know, as soon as I'm in a corner where I don't know what to do, that's actually where I start working. So this is an impossible question to ask. You know, what was that meeting about? What did they talk about? So what came out of it was that painting, and for me was like a kind of abstracted understanding of what was happening between those two men. So that's that was the beginning. That was the I was continuing my understanding on the dictatorship. So that's one of this. I also painted flowers because I don't know if you saw Mario, the mentor I showed you about. he had a quote I really liked, and then I sent you in my notes. It's called, "It all started with the garden." That quote stayed with me because I love nature. I mean, I grew up around nature. And for me, this painting is called Eternal Flowers, and the flowers that I also painted in the first iteration of One Future. It's a kind of way to commemorate those people, but also trying to find a way to address nature, you know, which is kind of impossible from a human perspective, but it's something that I try to do. So I really, and I know Richard might relate to that, because I know he works a lot around nature and its beauty, which is kind of God, basically. So so I did this, and this is Fall Dimanche, Us 2, which is a painting about kids playing in the rumble of a place called Fall Dimanche. Was a jail, which was considered a Haitian Auschwitz at the time, because if they send you to that jail, you're actually gonna get you're actually gonna die. I mean, certain people survived it, but it's like a few. So the idea was to kind of create a tension between the kids playing in a space that they might not know carry that kind of aura and legacy. So there's kind of gap in history where the youth don't know, because growing up in Haiti, we didn't talk a lot about the dictatorship. So it's something that is problematic. So it was also, the way I engaged with that was also for me a way to kind of close these gaps and start conversations, because there's a generation that lived a trauma and not just carried it on the next one. And the way that they dealt with it was to mute us, in the sense that I don't ask questions about what happened. So this is like a painting that talks about that in that sense. And in that body of work, I touched for the first time a kind of a conceptualization of figuration, in a sense. And I understood in the process, it's a painting called Loyalty. I understood working around these concepts that figuration doesn't exist for me, actually. And I don't think figurative painting actually exists at the end of the day, because the relationship that we have with what we're painting is conceptual. So we're always constantly bouncing around ideas, around concept, or what we're painting. Even if we're painting reality, at the end of the day, we're producing it, and the painting is always a painting. It never comes into reality and becomes something. So because of that, I really believe that we're only dealing with conceptual images and creating conceptual contents. So it's while I was working on that painting, that's why I'm putting it in. It's while I was working on that painting that I understood that I understood what it was to work on a concept, because the image source of that painting is the funeral of Papa Doc, which is the father, François Duvalier. And I took a still from that and I painted it. And the bottom part of it is kind of like, there's like a car and there's like a goose of flowers on top of it. And these are the people around it. And in the video, people are screaming, and you don't know if they're screaming out of love or out of fear. And for me, that was the whole thing. The whole question was like, what it is that they're actually screaming about, you know, what is this about? And it started, again, it was impossible to answer that question. So that's when I started the painting, and I started dealing with the concepts of loyalty. So so I'm gonna show you there's a segment about Baldwin that I'm going to play again, that is going to talk about interconnection and originality, because that's going to be the introduction to the second part. I mean, not the second part, but to a part of my presentation in relation to my work, and in relation to the accidents I just had, because it's really important to understand the base of the interconnection. So let me just, and that's gonna be the last time I'm doing that, so we don't have to worry about the back and forth again. 1 second. All right, can you hear? Okay, so that's another 3 minutes, and then we're gonna go back to, so so he's gonna talk there. What I understand about that segment, he's gonna talk about an interconnection, that the interconnection that we have with each other, and the originality that can come out of talking about what you're going through. And I decided to put that segment because we're gonna get into a content that I worked on that a relationship to the accident I just had. So there you go.
You are compelled, you are corralled, you are bullwhipped into dealing with whatever it is that hurt you. And what is crucial here is that if it hurt you, that is not what is important. Everybody's hurt. What is important, what bullwhips you, what corrals you, what drives you, torments you, is that you must find some way of using this to connect you with everyone else alive, because it's all you have to do it with. You must understand that your pain is trivial, except insofar as you can use it to connect with other people's pain, and insofar as you can do that with your pain, you can be released from it, and then hopefully it works the other way around too. Insofar as I can tell you what it is like to suffer, perhaps I can help you to suffer less. Then you make, 15 years later, several thousand drinks later, 2 or 3 divorces, God knows how many broken friendships, and an exile of one kind or another, some kind of breakthrough, which is your first articulation of who you are, which is to say, your first articulation of who you suspect we all are. Let me put it another way. When we were all very young, when I was very young, and I'm sure this is true for everybody here, I assumed that no one had ever been born who was only 5 foot 6 inches tall, or been born poor, or been born ugly, or masturbated, or done all those things which were my private property when I was 15. No one had ever suffered the way I suffered. And then you discover, and I discovered this through Dostoevsky, that it is common. Everybody did it. Not only did everybody do it, everybody's doing it. And all the time. It's a fantastic and terrifying liberation. The reason it is terrifying is because it makes you once and for all responsible to no one but yourself. Not to God the Father, not to Satan, not to nobody, not a living. Just you.
Yeah, so it's really important. It wasn't really important to put that that segment because I don't want to start this conversation with any kind of sense of originality, you know, this idea that I'm going to be working on something that happened to me. So what you need to understand, for example, this is a picture after the accident, and I use that picture to do that painting here. So what happened is that I was hit by a motorbike and I had a severe concussions. So I broke my face, my jaw, and I lost my short-term memory for a while. So it took me about 6 months to recover. I went through therapy, et cetera, et cetera. So, so the reason I'm talking about that and I'm approaching like that, and I'm using actually Baldwin's words, is that the idea was not to victimize or to kind of like put myself in a situation where I was, I had any kind of answers. You know, the idea, it didn't start, journey didn't start for me from a perspective of I've understood something and I'm going to try to reveal it to everybody. It actually started from getting closer to what I lived, and through that proximity, address certain things. For example, that painting is called Ritual. And what I understood from that period, for that moment, or for that, using that image, is that I really believe that in moments of fragility or vulnerability, when our lights are deemed, people gather around us if we're lucky, if we have love around us, and they kind of try to nurture that life, that light. So this is that understanding that I had, and it ended up with the painting being called Ritual. And that in that same context, I started working around concept like solitude. This is the painting here. So you can probably see somebody sitting and just blurring into the background, the white background. So I worked around ideas in relation to solitude. About this is a study on vulnerability. So you can probably see two figures. So this is, for example, what I understood from that. From those emotions and feelings and understanding of my humanity, because at the end of the day, I think it's about, as an artist, we're actually trying to articulate our humanity in many ways in the language that we're gifted with, and it's a life journey. You know, there's no shortcuts. I will talk about shortcuts in the future and later on, but there's no shortcuts about addressing what really feeds your soul, basically. So that was an experience that was important for me to talk about. This is Amnesia. So this is the most conceptual piece that I did in the piece, is that what I understood memory, since I've lost it, memory is accumulation of a certain accumulation of information. These information are so close to each other to create a kind of like elasticity on our understanding of what's real. You know, and the closer they are, the more you can kind of get information and see the full picture of it. So so that painting is kind of like, with the idea of repetition, it really goes with the same idea and concepts of losing information and getting information to a certain point. So this is a lot like I work. I kind of combine conceptuality and the kind of mark making in that sense. So the other thing I'm going to talk about, I don't know, do you know about Tomatrop? Tomatrop is kind of like a 19th century kind of game. I'm just going to show it to you. I'm just going to show it to you quick. This is something, it's a 19th century game. This is what it is. Can you see it? Okay, so this is a really important base to understand the next steps in what I'm going to explain to you, because this is a old, very simple game, and this process of having two images and two, let's say, content flicking and creating one image. And you have this context where this guy's painting, which is ironic. I saw it, I liked it, because maybe painters can relate, like not knowing what they're doing. And also the bird and all of that. So this kind of process really struck me, because it really forces me to understand the limits of figuration in the creation, and the psychology around creating images, in the sense that what if the subject and his context was constantly flicking, and the lines between that subject and this context was constantly blurring itself. And this is something that I'm going to show you images where I kind of use that thought process. but you can use it for people, you can use it for objects. Well, I've used it for people, I've used it for objects, relationship with the subject and his context. If you know about Zygmunt Bauman, you'll find some theories, his theories of liquidity can really be applied to this, to this approach. And further than that, I'm gonna go back to the images because that's more fun than the flicking. The images, what's more interesting for me at the time was also to apply these kind of things, because I told you that I don't believe in figuration, is to apply these things for concepts. For example, if I'm interested in, and it's in that particular analysis that I understood when I was talking about loyalty, I wasn't just talking about loyalty. I was talking about fear. I was talking about oppression. I was talking about glorification, and all these elements piled up on each other to kind of shape what the image is. So it happens with the subject and its context, for example, and that this is I was in the south of Haiti on vacation at some point in Jacmel, and we went to order some food, and I was waiting, and I saw this kind of painting on the wall of the restaurant, and I was like, I really like the structure of the lady doing the you know, cleaning and her clothes and or her family's clothes, as far as I'm concerned. And I took that structure and I used it to do that painting here. But it was a distance of months for me to do the painting, in the sense that I took the image and I understood. So why I'm showing you that image with after that idea of tomatropy, because for me, that's what it is. You know, when this is a perfect example of when the subject kind of becomes its environment and vice versa, you know. And it's interesting visually in the sense that it ended up being that. And I think in the concept of being in a world of representation, I think it's one of the things that kept me going in that journey is just to push the limits of what it is to represent things, you know. And to the point of like, maybe my body, or what I define as my body, the limits of my body is actually where my eyes can reach. Like my skin is not really my skin, but my skin is actually where my eyes can wander. You know, like if I'm looking at the wall, then it means that this wall becomes an extension of my skin. So all these kind of ideas, tomatrop, there's a bunch of other things like that I ask myself, or that I kind of put in my journey, and when I'm trying to represent things. And we're talking about painting, but I think we can do that with several mediums, because they're all part of, it's just language in a sense. You know, how do you use language and poetry and words and video and sculpture? Sculpture has there's a lot of that in it. Also, this idea of the expansion of representation in that sense. So yeah, so we have that image here where you have the and it's like a wink to Bowman in that sense, because you know there's a sense of liquidity with that figure here. You have this one that is like an old painting that is actually called Tomatrop. But the idea was that the figure is kind of like becoming a chair, and the chair is becoming the figure. You know, I really like that idea because it really forces me to ask myself, and I think it's always a beautiful place to start, is when you're gonna represent something or kind of play around an object, is to ask yourself, what is a chair? You know, at what point the chair disappears and I can actually become the chair. And as soon as I'm falling into that conversation of becoming the environment or the objects or fusing with them, this is really a very generative space to talk about representation, especially in painting, where it's so sensual, you know, and can be so direct. You have this other painting that's called Wind Chime, which is a figure laying in the grass, and a woman actually. And the woman is actually becoming the grass, and the grass is becoming the figure. So you're constantly in that space of flicking, you know, like a mental visual flicking And what is interesting to me is that it creates a tension where it demands it demands that you complete it. It's like a gauge, like a Gestalt, you know? It demands that you complete itself, and that space of completion and of kind of constant navigation and trying to figure out what it is that you're looking at. For me, it's important for me in the studio to always be in that space where I'm looking at an artwork or an artwork that I'm doing. I'm always asking myself what it is that I'm looking at. You know, this is a very basic question, but this is a very important question. And it's in that place that there's a lot of tension going on, and the time that you spend trying to figure out what it is that you're looking at, for me, that's the time of the painting. Because I think every artworks, they have a time, you know, they have a time that they claim, they commend you a certain amount of time. And I used to say that, I mean, a good piece is like a piece that kind of like, it takes your eyes first, you know, and then you get closer, and then it takes your body, and then it takes your soul. So in that sense, I like this idea, and the ways that are the mechanism that I found to kind of do that is to create that space, that tension, where you're constantly trying to, you know, contradict. There's a lot of contradiction within the painting where it's telling you it's something, or in the composition, it's sending you places, but there's nothing to see. So you have to come back. So this kind of dynamic, you can find it a lot in the work of Kandinsky, or I mean, there's a lot of good and even in music, in electronic music, actually, you find a lot of that, because in a sense, music is space. This is another one in terms of concept. I think this is the last one. Yeah. Oh no. Okay. In terms, I'm gonna be more than 25 minutes on that part. Sorry about that. So this is another idea about this idea of combination. I mean, the combination is not enough of a word, because it's not, I'm not combining them. I'm trying to create a space for them to coexist. And this is a really good example, in the sense that, because it started from a conceptual necessity. The idea was that I'm a swimmer, all right? So I love water. I can't swim right now because of the pandemic, but I used to swim a lot. I used to be a swimming teacher. So that painting was a kind of question that I was asking. What happened? I don't know if you guys used to dive. There's a moment where you get in the water, you really feel like the water just shakes the shit out of you. You know what I mean? Especially if you're going head down. So I wanted to capture that moment. You know, I wanted to not capture it, but I wanted to talk about it. Because the idea is like, the illusion of trying to crystallize something in painting is just a pure illusion for me. But so this painting is called Diving In. So the idea is to kind of like capture that moment where your body hits the water and you feel like your kind of eyes gets in your ass, you know, just kind of like, so you can see it in the painting. There's a big dynamic involved in that. So that's kind of like the setup for that. And so a painting like that, there's not much to say. What you see is what you get, really. So I'm not going to try to explain what's going on. That was the premise of the idea. Yeah. So this is Tomatrop. To close that segment, I'm going to talk about inspiration. I could say, again, I'm not a scholar. I can't tell. I could quote a bunch of people talking about inspiration. I'm just going to tell you how certain ideas came into my work. All right. Certain artists influenced my work, and how they kind of nurture new practices within my journey. And if that helps you, good. If not, then too bad. But that's what's going to be. All right. So I was, in my journey of moving away from Western understanding of art, which is one way of understanding of art, right? It's important to say it as it is. It's one way of understanding it. I looked a lot on the work of artists that I admired, like Georges Liautaud. which is a Haitian sculptor, if I can put it like that, or tinker, I would put it. He works with metal, metal carving. So this is for me like this is the best piece I've seen in a very long time, because the woman is giving birth smiling and the baby's coming out smiling. I don't know if you notice, but for me, that's like a win. You know, it's like there's like a conceptual thing going on for me in that piece that is incredible, you know? And it's very simple. You kind of know what's going on. And I really like, for me, what I really want to take away from that guy is it's the lines. It's very, very simple lines, but he managed to kind of using simple lines to kind of create strong metaphors. You know, so you have George Liotto who did that, who taught me a lot about lines, and that's another one that I really like. And you have Bill Traylor, which is an American. They're both self-taught artists, and there's always something. There's always like interesting approaches from self-taught artists, because I really believe that your language comes from your capacity to create shortcuts in your work, meaning that you're trying to get somewhere. Yeah, you're trying to get somewhere. You know you're trying to get somewhere. You don't know how to get there. And what is going to become your style, what is going to become your language, is your capacity to find shortcuts to get where you want to go. All right. So school doesn't help you with finding those shortcuts. By school, I mean universities, like academia, because they're trying to put words on the journey. Well, there's no words on the journey. All right. That's what I believe. Now we can argue about that. We have time. But what is interesting to see about these artists is that they haven't been, I don't want to say corrupted, but the only thing they know is their shortcuts. And that's very powerful when you're actually, when you went in academia and come out of it, you see how direct, there's no bullshit in these works, you know? And for me, to get back to Liotto and to come back to Bill, it's the lines. The lines, their lines are simple, they're pure in that sense, and they're trying to tell you something with no superficial kind of, they're not trying to convince you of anything. They just are what they are, which I think is very powerful from a self-taught artist. That's another piece that I like from Bill. So these artists, I try to take those understanding of shapes and lines and bringing into my understanding of what lines can be. And I already kind of, I have a very prolific drawing practice. This is, for example, one work that's called Mindfulness. This is about this idea. I mean, it's not about any idea. You can see this is a combination of lines that kind of emanate a certain energy. And that's what I think these guys actually do. So I was fascinated by that. And that's another one, which is actually, this one is called Study on a Line. So this is basically a line that I was kind of playing with. So the line was always something important. I mean, if you're drawing, and if you looked at the works of, let's say, Claude Parent, you can see that with lines alone, you can do anything. Anything's possible with lines. So what I did is I took those lines and the metaphors, or the strength of these metaphors, and I brought it into a new medium, because the idea for me is to actually, in my practice, which is the word practice, is already a word that is kind of like, you know, a jargon that I think is funny. So is to kind of take this language of those lines and shapes and to bring into unforeseen territories, you know. And the way that I understood I could do that is through ceramics. And that's how I started a new body of work. And now I'm doing sculptures in the studio. It's like something I've never done. I don't know how to do sculptures. I'm learning how to think around that thing, but this is fairly new to me. So I started doing ceramics, but doing these simple concepts and understanding these lines that these guys were actually using, you know, and to kind of, and in that process, I understood how important it was to kind of like trust the material, like, you know, whether it's a painting, whether it's an installation, every artwork has their own intelligence. So you need to be sensitive to that intelligence and just create space for it, basically. That's kind of, basically, that's my job, you know, to channel that thing. So I did works like that. It's funny because I mean, ceramic is alchemy. If anybody of you ever done that, it's just kind of basic, kind of water, the four elements, and you kind of create magic with it. So for me, that was something that's very seductive in that sense, because I'm not trying to do art, I'm trying to find it. You know, I'm really trying to kind of like find it when it happens, and I'm not trying to actually do it, you know, or kind of claim that it's my kind of property or whatever. So these are kind of like in the same concept of lines. Obviously, these guys are better than me. They have like years of experience when it comes to kind of like shaping lines, but this gives you an idea of how inspiration can actually make its way into my work, and shift my practice in that sense. Because you told me 2 years ago I would do ceramics, I would laugh at your face. This is, I think, the last one. So the last image I'm going to show you, I really hope that you read about the stick chart that I sent you, because that was a discovery that really changed the understanding for me of what life can be, in the sense that, and might sound esoteric, or it might sound like childish, but the way that these men navigated the world with these objects, with considering so many elements, and the fact that each one have their own, you know, it's like, it's not a matter, I cannot give you my stick chart. You understand what I'm saying? You have your stick chart, I have my stick chart. It's mine look different than yours because my sensibility is different. You know, the way I move, the way I am touched by the you know, by the ocean swells, you know, by the temperature, by the all these things. And I think these are I think this is a very powerful metaphor on how we navigate the world as human beings, in terms of energies, in terms of emotions, in terms of feelings, you know. And it can be relations with people, you know, how we connect with people, how we feel things. Our intuition can actually feed us in certain direction or in others. But that's when I understood that through that idea of stick chart, it was really changed. It shifted something for me, and it actually brought me to do, that's the last ceramics. It actually brought me to do that painting here, which is actually called stick chart. Because I really wanted to create, and this is a massive painting. I think it's like 110 or 20 inches by 90 or 100, I don't know. But this idea, and the reason I'm showing it to you, I'm introducing you to this idea of stick chart, because these are things that this is a painting I've did last, this is the last biggest painting I've done last year. So these are things that are actually happening in the studio, and they're shifting me. They're shifting my practice, they're shifting my understanding of what painting is. So this is, it was important for me to tell you about that, because this is how I work. this is how I let things in. This is what can, from an inspiration of an artist, this things can shift the mediums that I use, and how this idea of stick chart can affect me to the point that I can do a painting like that, and still using that idea to kind of understand, like, and before, that's the last image before I finish that part of the presentation. But I'm going to leave you on what is your swells? What are your swells? That's a very simple question, but it's something that, like, just think about it if you care enough, if you want to just go that way. But I think it's a very simple question, but that has a lot of depth in it, because these guys, they had to trust their own swells to kind of like get home, basically. So I think, yeah, what are your swells? What are your ocean swell? What would you define as your swell? What is actually what are you sensitive to enough that helps you find your base and your center? Like Usman said, all these things, just to loop into the beginning, all these things, they kind of like, when you listen to them, you kind of always come back to your center. So that's the first part. Yeah, so I wanted to leave a 10-minute, I mean, I don't know, maybe I took an hour to do the entire thing.
That's okay. We can
up. But it's funny because this is the writing for the this is like three phrases that just lasted, I don't know how long, but yeah, so I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask me questions about what I just told you, and then we can get into this idea of simplicity and ephemerality, which is more going to be, I don't know, something else outside of my personal work.
I believe I've got Farron here that has a question for you, or possibly a comment, and I'll let her go ahead and ask it.
Thanks so much. Hi. It's so cool how research is so interwoven into your practice or work. And I was really curious about how that works into it. So anything from like when you start looking into research at the beginning or experiences to near the end, and whether it's necessary that people know the context and the references when they're looking at your work.
My swells is my intuition, and not necessarily like when I'm doing it, but I really trust. There's certain energies that drags me certain places. Like, for example, when I was doing my residency in Germany, I started thinking about desire. Actually, I started making work. Let me tell you, the idea is that I started making work. I started making work with fabric and with fire and with dust, something like really different than what I usually do, right? But I didn't want to find answers before I do the work. I really needed to see the work and then understand it, which is very different the way we kind of work in academia, because I think the long-term effect of it is that we kind of lost our agency, in the sense that it has to make sense to us before we actually do it. While a lot of the things that we discover that are really a discovery, they're things that we kind of don't know what we're doing, And I'm going to talk about repetition as an act of fate, in a sense, but it's a beautiful way to find things. Just that idea of repetition. And to get back to your question, is when I was doing that, I did some work around this idea of like finding things within the work and then come back to talk about it, instead of applying knowledge on objects, or applying, because I see the painting as an object, right? So I can do a dot and I can do, okay, this dot is like the entrance to the universe, and then I say, yeah, but it's just a dot. Can you just can the dot just be the dot, and then from there maybe something can happen? You know, so it took me months to kind of understand when I was burning these fabrics and putting them together. There's an image of it at the end. It's called Resilience, a study on desire. That I was working on desire, you know, and it took me months to kind of understand this is what it's about. So now I understood what it's about. So what it is what do I want to talk about around desire? And why am I talking about desire? You know what I mean? Because I think like that, there's also room for you to surprise yourself in the process, you know, because if you're doing what you know, you only find what you know, right? If you're creating a space of things that you already know, then there's no way you can discover something that you don't know. You got to do something you don't know to find something you don't know. So that was like the context. And then once you're kind of touching that idea of desire, you're asking yourself, why am I talking about desire? You know, and then why this thing came to me like that? And is it like a blow? Is it kind of like a kind of like, is it a moment, or is this something has depth in it? Because I had an understanding is that, you know, really good artists, they probably have like 5 subjects they talk about, right? And then you have amazing artists that they probably have like 3 subjects. But the best of the best, they only have one thing they're talking about their entire life. You know, when you look around and you kind of like pile up all the artists that you know, and you look at the ones you consider the best, they're not talking about 1,000 things, you know, they just obsessed with something, and that thing just is a kind of like 1,000 point of views on that obsession, you know. And it could be a concept, it could be an event, it can be whatever it is, but it really comes from that kind of, you know, it's usually one thing, not just. Louis Bourgeois is a good example. Clifford Still in his painting, you know, if he discovered something, you have another. There's a painter, it's called Franz Zeffirien. I mean, there's a lot of artists, and this is like across the board. It's not a matter of like nationality or power structure around the work, but just the fact that you can tell this human being is touching something, and he or she's not letting go of it, you know. And you feel these things, you know. I'm going to talk about honesty and not the other segment. You can see these things. It's not, you know, the reality that like the real, when it's real, it's just like the bullshit. You can't, you know, there's no bullshit about it. So and you know, I'm still, to get back to you, to close your question, to kind of finish it, I still don't know why I'm talking about desire, but I definitely want to expand on that. For example, now the desire evolved as How to Make Love to a Negro, you know, which is a book from Daniela Ferrier, who's a Haitian writer, you know. And again, it's impossible to answer that question, right? How to make love to a Negro. And then that's when I start working. So that's kind of what it is.
I think Connor, yeah, it's Connor who has a question as well.
Yeah, a little bit of a different kind of mode of thought, but a few things you've mentioned here, kind of this idea that, you know, a painting is an object. And then earlier you kind of mentioned like, you know, a painting's always a painting. It doesn't enter reality. And then even the image of the first images you showed, the paintings were on the floor, on these little blocks, kind of entering a space. I don't know if you can kind of speak to how these objects exist.
Wait, you mean like the first image, like you referring to what I was showing?
Yeah, of your own work, like your
I think you mean like the execution of Jacques Stéphane Alexis. All right, so these are silicone blocks I mean, don't even ask me how I got to do silicone blocks, but this thing happened. Now I have silicone all over the studio. But what I'm trying to say is that I really think that a part of the painting operate in our understanding of it, or in our sensibility. You know what I mean? Because the painting, and I did a show that's called The Spell on You, you know, in reference to Nina Simone. But I really think that objects, and I'm a little bit of an animist in that sense, I really think that objects have their aura, you know. And to be able to get a little bit further, I got to a point where I asked myself, maybe when I'm starting a painting, the paintings already exist and I'm just applying patina on the painting or on the object for the painting to reveal itself. You know what patina is, just so I put it in context, it's like this kind of like layer of time and slash dust that you can have on certain metal over time, you know? So it's kind of like, there's a time aspect to it that I think is very poetic. And I did a painting that's called Patina. But to get back to your question, actually did two paintings that's called Patina. To get back to your question is, you know, the painting is a residue of a thought that you had, or residue of thoughts that you had, right? So it's an object, but that has a certain kind of energy, that has a certain kind of aura. And what is that energy? What is that aura? For me, that's when we start talking about the painting itself, and we're actually leaving the object, and we're in a space where we're trying to talk about our presence in front of that, or in relation with that energy. That's why I see it as any kind of object. For sure, we kind of add meaning to it, or spiritual value to it, with our actions or with our sensibility. But at the end of the day, it's an object that has its own intelligence, and that carries its own aura. And therefore, for me, it stays in the realm of a, you know, when you close the light and you go to bed, your painting is just an object on the wall, you know. It started existing. I mean, we can argue because this idea of like a tree falls in the forest and nobody sees it. Did it actually fell? You know what I mean? People will say, no, it doesn't matter. People will say, yes, it fell because it happened. Yes and no, because I don't think the tree is there to kind of preserve our humanity or nurture our humanity. You know what I mean? Or is not leaving a trace behind us. And that's where Baldwin is interesting in that sense, because by saying that only artists kind of encapsulate our experiences, well, these objects are kind of, they are part of that, you know, preservation of our humanity. But for me, they stay objects. They operate in a different world, you know. And I don't know what world exactly. You know, I wouldn't be able to tell you the address. You know what I mean? I just know that something happened, you know. And you know, after the Spell on You show I did was right after my accident. My show, I did the show on dictatorship, the show on the accident. And then after that, I needed to get away from that, you know, the weight of history or my legacy and the weight of the accident. You know, that was very personal. It was a very personal show. But I needed to kind of see the object for what it was. So that's why I fell into the idea of the spell, because, you know, it created more elasticity on my understanding of what art can be. That's why it's a journey. You know, all these shows, they kind of point you of where I am. And that's why you know, I had the accident. If I didn't have the accident, I don't think I would have made the show about the dictatorship, because, you know, I almost died. And then when I came back to the studio, I couldn't paint for a very long time. And I asked myself, okay, and this was a serious question to me because it could have happened. I asked myself, if this was my last show, would I be, because first, my final show was about to be on George Bataille, a book that's called Story of the Eye. If you haven't read that book, it's like thin, like this piece of paper. Like, give yourself this gift, get this book, you're gonna have a blast. It's a little bit tricky in the head. If you know George Bataille, a lot of nasty sex, beating people up. I mean, it's immoral, but it's very fun. It's really funny. So that was supposed to be the show. So after the accident, I asked myself, if this was my last show, would it be about George Bataille? And the answer was no. And I had to reevaluate everything. So the reason I'm saying that is because that experience, more importantly, taught me about the urgency of doing what I do. How urgent it is for you to do what you do, and how important for you to do it the way you believe you should do it. If you have an answer to that and you're comfortable with the answer for that, then you're probably on a good path, because you're going to fall into a space of honesty, of simplicity, and you're going to be exactly where you want to be, technically. And you're more likely going to kind of, nurture that, the patina you need to do these objects.
That's great. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, Robin, you can make your comment or ask your question.
It's Robin Miller, huh?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, Robin.
Hi.
It's because I can't see you all at once, so I got to scroll to find the person. I kind of like it. It's kind of fun. Nice meeting you.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I thought I knew what I was going to ask, but now you got me thinking other things.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I should have just shut up.
So good. I love what you said in part of your answer there about artists kind of acting as like conduit or a channel for something that doesn't really belong to them. And I just really like that comment on energy and how it's as though that energy or that patina or that aura of the painting or object, in the case of other artistic expressions, it kind of wants to exist.
Yeah.
I really like that. But my question before was kind of along the lines of thinking about, I also really enjoy this melding of the environment and your persons or subjects in your paintings. And I think that that's this interconnection between the two, the inanimate, the animate, is really fascinating to me. And I think that that kind of relates to my question around how the work is accessed or undertaken and how it's changing you. You talked a bit about that.
Yeah.
How it kind of like shifts you in some way, kind of like clay. Like I work with clay, and I've always thought of the clay as kind of changing me and I changing the clay. And there's this kind of conversation that develops between myself and the material. It's been healing for me. It's been a lot of things for me, but I just kind of wanted to know maybe a little more what you meant by that. And yeah, just elaborate on that from your experience, because I was interested.
You mean how the work changes me? Huh?
Yeah, just like how the work shifts, like, and that conversation that develops between you and the work.
You know, for me, I'm gonna bring you back to that idea of the swells that I told you about the ocean swells, in the sense that I think making art is constantly being on the ocean, like on it. You know what I mean? There's no moment in the process, whether it's before, whether it's while I'm researching, whether it's while I'm doing it, that I'm not constantly on the water, just kind of like moving around and being sensitive to the things that are happening in the work, the things that are happening around me, the things that are happening with the people I meet, in the conversation I have, like what we're having right now, all these things, they are shaping kind of my sensibility, my understanding of that kind of experience. And I think, you know, to get back to kind of what Baldwin was saying in terms of interconnection is and that idea, what you said about the channeling is, when I was making the work about, you know, and around my accident, because it wasn't about the accident itself, the same way when I was working under dictatorship, in my head, I wasn't focusing on the dictatorship itself, but I was working around the things, you know, in relation to the dictatorship. This is a more generative space for me than working on something. It's, for example, and I like to say it a lot in the studio, like I don't work, emotions don't come in the studio. You know what I mean? And people go like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I don't let that thing in because it kind of blurs my judgment. You know what I mean? It's like the same point of view of like, don't hate your enemy. I like gangster movies. So it's like, it goes like, don't hate your enemy, you know, don't kind of like, don't have any hard feelings for them because it blurs, it's like it blurs your judgment. But it's the same thing, you know? And reality is, as I'm growing as a human being, my understanding of what love is also shift. And the idea is like to bring that, to honestly bring these discoveries. And I'm saying love, but it can also be shame. You know, it can be destruction. You know, I didn't show you a painting that's called Selfish Thinking, which is a painting where, you know, it was my understanding of how I was taking decision that was destroying myself. You know what I mean? And it's called selfish thinking. So I'm trying to bring all these things in conversation, because love, for example, when you talk about love, for me, if I was to make something around love or even desire, because this idea of desire for me is something that can be very fatal, and at the same time, it's something that can build you up. So there's a contradiction in this idea of desire or in love. You know, love comes with jealousy. It comes with intense joys and sufferings, you know, and when you put all these things together, then you have a kind of spectrum. And that's, it's in that environment. And the link, you know, the point of view with the tomatrop is, if you had different you know, piece of papers with an image on it, and all these things were flicking at the same time, then you have a kind of overall point of view on what's happening. And I believe that my human experience is a lot like that, in the sense that there's a lot of things that are constantly overlapping. And that's where the ocean swell comes into play, because there's the swells, there's the temperature, there's like how you feel about how was your day. And you have a map that only you can read. You know, that's, for me, that's what does it. It's the idea that each one of us have a map that is determining where we're actually going, you know, and what is affecting us in the journey to go left or right, you know. In their case, it's easy. They're trying to find the land. But us, what are we trying to find exactly? You know, as artists, we get a lot of time to think about it, because it's kind of like at every corner, you get to do something, an artwork, they call it, that becomes a residue of your journey, you know? And, you know, in that sense, when Baldwin was saying that we're kind of the only kind of species as artists to kind of like do things that reflects our presence on this earth. You know, without art, what would be the thing that would, like the buildings, you know, like the Senza stores or the Gucci watch? What are the things that are actually really gonna talk about our depth as a species, you know? And we can argue there's other things, yeah, for sure. I mean, you can say you're preaching for your choir, you know, but the depth of it is I haven't seen it anywhere else, and I've been trying to find. I've been looking, you know. So, you know, to get back to your question, is it's really hard to answer it, because you know, it's a combination of things, and of trusting, of embracing the things that happens to you, of asking the hard questions, you know, and to stay, you know, you saw the Haraway video that I sent. She's amazing. And she's, you know, there's a quote, she said, you got to stay with the trouble, with the problem, you know, you stay with it. You ask yourself, where it is that I'm going, where's the land for me, you know? And everything in the process is worth your attention. You know, for example, the swells the painting I did about the stick chart, you know, it's about the discovery of the stick chart and what could it be to kind of navigate, you know what I mean? That's not even talking about the destination itself, you know? And I think the poetry of it is that is to be able to kind of be sensitive to these things, and how you can bring them into your language and into your work, into your sensibility, you know? Yeah, it's a coffee conversation, you know. It's kind of like we got to dive into that further, but I hope it helps. But you know, it's the question you're asking is something that I'm trying to figure out every day. You know, how does, you know, where's my work, where's like life, and how does that intertwine, and what do I keep, what is mine in the process? And I'm going to talk about it briefly when it comes to simplicity with Francis Bebe instrument, the instrument he was playing. It's one note, right? It's very, very simple, but what it does is that you can't hide. You know, it's very, when you bring it down to very simple things, you can't hide. It's a one note that you, like, the music will come from your capacity to play around that one thing, which is very powerful for, like, it's a very simple instrument, but when you're actually playing it, you understand that, oh, fuck, do you actually have it? You know what I mean? And if you don't, what are the shortcuts that you have to kind of like get away with what you want to say? Because it's at the bottom line is, what is that you want to say? You know what I mean? Or what is that you're carrying, if you want to put it like that? It's a very simple question, but it's a kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're all figuring it out, right? That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your question.
So Manuel, we usually kind of go to 9. I know it's midnight where you are.
Is it? Yeah, it is. It's gonna be midnight. Well, if you guys still want to go, I can go through my things. If you're gonna leave, we can close it like that. I'm cool with both ways.
Well, I was going to see how you feel, how you're feeling, and we can.
Well, I can go through this thing quick. You know, it's not gonna be like the other one. It's not gonna be like a maximum of 10 minutes. I'm gonna wrap it up because you're right. It's late. It's kind of midnight.
It's really your call. It's up to you.
All right, so I'm gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it like super fast, but it's not gonna be as long as the other one. There's not gonna be no videos or things like that. It's just gonna be what it is. All right, so simplicity and ephemerality, ladies and gentlemen.
Go for it.
So for me, my understanding of simplicity is something that is somehow honest. You know, it's deeply linked to honesty, and to a point, like what it is that I can do without. You know, that's where, for me, where it starts. And I talked about it in terms of urgency and things like that. So you saw that one, right? The line made by walking from our dear friend. So the reason I want to talk about this, I'm not going to stay too long on it, is the ephemerality of in that idea of simplicity. This embodies it really, really well. And this idea also that, you know, spring is going to come, it's going to go away, it's going to walk again, and it's going to do it. And, you know, this idea that I told you about what you can't do without, it's like, what is necessary for you? What is simple and what is necessary for you to do what you do? What are the things that you need to do what you do? And that's a good, like, you know, display of what is necessary for this guy. You know, for him is to walk that line every day. you know, and to kind of like through is the repetition. You know, I was talking about simplicity. You combine the simplicity and the repetition. And I wanna do a leap with you guys with that line in relation to an artist that I also love. In the erasure of on the floor of that picture, what if it can be someone's life? I mean, you probably know Roman Opaka, right? If you don't know about him, so is this dude. So he took a picture of himself every now and then towards he was growing old, and you can see his disappearance. His work, the main work that he did for the last half of his life was to document his, I don't want to say his death, but his disappearance, all right? And parallel to taking these pictures, he was also making these kind of paintings where he was writing numbers from 0 to infinity. And as he was getting closer to the end, he lightening the paint. So there was a point where he was writing letters, writing numbers on a white paint on a white background. So for me, that's an interesting metaphor with the line, you know. It's an interesting metaphor with the line and this idea of repetition, in the sense that how do you turn something extremely simple into, when you repeat it, it becomes something else. I said I wouldn't do a video, but I can't not show you that one. All right. 1 second. Just need to find it. I mean, you saw Pina, right? The video I sent you, Pina Bosch. Yeah, so she's amazing. What I'm going to show you is a section of, let me show you, a section of a video that she did, right? Which is that one. So, can you hear me when I speak and you can hear this at the same time? Okay. So what is interesting to me in that video is that is the moment where the guy tried to kind of, the guy keeps coming and positioning them over and over and over and over and putting her like that and over. And when he puts her like that, she keeps falling. Yeah? So she falls. And the guy comes in again and take her and does it. And that's interesting, all right? I think the part that is more interesting to me is that part. It's when they keep doing it without him. Because right now, it's not about them doing something they don't like, but it's about them being trapped in a repetition. And now we're experiencing something completely different. All right, so, and now they hugged and then that's it. So the reason I'm showing you that is because that part stayed with me because it's very, very simple. And in that idea of repetition, I think there's something close to fate. You know, I think there's something that is close to, I'm not used to, I didn't say religion. I said fate, in the sense that what you do with yourself or for others becomes your religion to a certain point. You know, it becomes your kind of way of being. And, you know, as artists, we kind of always, we kind of do a lot, we repeat a lot of things without us noticing, as like going to the same place and, you know, working, you can see working as the same thing. But I think it's important to underline that. And how you can use that idea of repetition in a poetic way. And I think that's a very powerful way, because it's done, it's done in dancing, and that's very hard to do. You know, it's very, very hard to do because it's your body you're using. You know what I mean? It's not like Opalka was just writing letters or things like that. I'm saying just, but it's very powerful. Don't get me wrong. But writing letters, but using it with your body is very interesting. So, and that idea, I believe it's the quest to a certain simplicity that we discover a style. You know, we discover ways. And what I mean, you know, is the thing that I told you about the shortcuts. You know, is the more you're capable of reducing the distance between where you want to go and what you want to do, or what you can do and where you want to go, the more you're capable of finding ways, the more you touch right on where you are, right on what you have in your toolbox, basically. And I've experienced it many times where and usually for me it happens out of laziness. You know, I'm trying to get somewhere, you know, and I don't want to do the extra mile that people would usually do. I'm like, okay, let me do this and that. And then you say, oh, this thing works. And you just keep going like that. You know what I mean? And that's a good thing. All right. And don't let people tell you otherwise. Like, being lazy forces you to kind of find ways to get to where you want to go in ways that people haven't thought about. You know what I mean? That's kind of like your biggest asset, is to find ways to get where you want to go in a way that is your way. That's like your signature. And that's in painting, it's kind of like, and that's how, in the sense that my painting taught me a lot in my life, you know, to get to your question, is that my painting taught me about humility. It taught me about patience. It taught me about trusting myself and creating shortcuts in many other areas in my life, because reality, we're the same in many ways. Like the lacks you have in your couple, you carry them in your work, or the struggles you have in your work, you carry them, because we're only a few different faces of ourselves. We're not 1,000 faces. So let me keep going, because we need to wrap up. This idea of like the Francis Bebe link that I sent you, you know, the one note thing. The one note is a very simple note, right? And by doing that, we can't really hide. Sorry, because we're the one actually carrying the music. You know, everything is about how we compose with that harmony, with balancing things together. You know, and he would started playing with his chest with the same note, and that's when with all of that, what in all of this is actually, you know, it forces you to ask yourself, what in all of this is actually mine? You know, when you reduce this to something very simple. And even that question is actually a problem. You know, does it have to be mine? What it is that is, which part of this process is actually mine, and why is that? You know, so by reducing that simplicity. That work is Angelica Loderer is a friend of mine who lives in Vienna, and the piece is called "The Space Between a Kiss." So you have to understand it's on a string, like, you know, from the floor up, and you come in and you're facing this thing. So I think it's very poetic, and there's something about the symbolic of it that is very powerful, which I think symbolism is one of the most powerful art segment or art courant that I think we undervalue it. I mean, we still use it in publicity. I don't know why we don't use it more in art anyway. So there's a certain poetry of ephemerality in this thing. And also when you think about Haiti Butcher, when she's actually using her installations, and she kind of mimic, she does like a imprints of the environment that she's in, you know, and she take the skin out and she shows it, for example, like that. So I think it's really interesting when you talk about living traces or being traces in an environment. It's very powerful for me, a piece like that, you know, because there's something that is very close to being insignificant, but at the same time very powerful. And usually when two opposite things get so close to each other, it usually creates something extremely powerful, you know, for me at least. And I'm going to finish on that image of one of the paintings I've worked on. I don't know if it's a painting, to be honest with you, but this is like this thing I was trying to do with the fabric, with the burnt, with the ink. It's a really messed up painting that is impossible to move, and just leaves traces all over the place. But this is kind of like one of the things that I thought of when I was in Germany, and not ended up making a painting about it. And this is what it is. And somehow I see these closer to sculptures because I'm combining different elements, like gluing things together, which is not the same for me than applying that patina. It seems like I'm just finding things and I'm putting them together. In that sense, I'm closer to Rauschenberg, or certain artists in Haiti who does recuperation. You know, they kind of take things from the garbage and they kind of turn them into sculptures. I'm going to close on telling you that I'm very happy to be doing that, to have done that for you. And I wish if there's a video that I would like you to watch, is the video on humanity that I sent you. It's a really, really powerful video about us as human beings. I've seen it years ago, but then I saw it again and it really, you know, got to me. So I thought I'd put it in my notes. But if you can watch this in all of the videos I sent you, that would be the one I would suggest to watch. On that bombshell, I think I'm done. I was thinking to make it a little longer, but I've been stretched it in my presentation. So sorry for keeping you so late, ladies and gentlemen. It was a pleasure.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Manuel. I
Well,
think
thank
we've
you
already
for having me.
had the question and the Q&A part, but we can definitely pick up this conversation again in the graduate seminar.
Yeah, I'm gonna be there. It's tomorrow at 10, right? Well, 10 my time, or no, it's 1 my time.
Yeah, 10.
All right, so it's all good. I'll be there, and if you have more questions, bring it on, and you can watch the video I told you about, and I know I have studio visits with some of you. I will look at your work and probably send you some comments or references before our conversation, so we can bounce ideas or things like that. All right. Otherwise, everybody else will see you at the seminar tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Good.
Manuel.
Yeah, have a great night. It's my
Thanks,
bed.
Manuel.
It's past my bedtime. It's a lockdown time. Lockdown bedtime.
Are you still in curfew over down?
Oh yeah. It's at 8, but it's like it's midnight now, so I can't really even go smoke a cigarette. I don't even smoke cigarettes, but I can't even go for a walk. Anyways, I'm not gonna complain. I'm not dead, right? This is a tragic situation.
Okay.
So thank you for having me again, and I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to kind of be as honest as possible.